caution. Listening to this podcast may motivate you to make positive changes in your life, identify ways to accelerate your career trajectory, and develop a path towards financial freedom. This is the Career Meets World podcast, and I'm your host, Edward Gorbis. And I've spent the last 10 years focused on helping thousands of people advance their career while in parallel teaching a secret recipe to reach financial independence. And I'm here to share the untold stories of successful people and teach thousands of listeners how to develop a growth mindset. And our minds are malleable, and everyone has the power to change their mindset through perseverance, dedication, and a passion for learning. So if you're ready to skyrocket your business and financial literacy, turn up the volume and let's dive right in. This is the Career Meets World podcast. Welcome back, podcast family. Thank you so much for joining us today and investing your time and energy into learning and committing to bettering yourself. With us today, we have a very special guest, and I'm so grateful that he joined us. His name is Mark Crowley. Many of you might know him for his famous, groundbreaking book, Lead from the Heart, Transformational Leadership for the 21st Century. Mark believes that organizations and leaders today are faced with an incredible challenge of attracting and retaining talented, productive, and resilient people. Compounding the problem in the fact that the 21st century employees demand far more than just a paycheck in order to commit to any organization. And when their needs aren't met, they simply move on. So to succeed going forward requires a reinvention of traditional leadership thinking, and for managers to support people in ways that fulfill their hardwired need for positive feelings and emotions. And it's only when human beings are thriving can or will they perform optimally. Mark is on a mission to fundamentally change how we lead and manage people in the workplace and to intentionally make it far more supportive for human needs. I'm so excited to share his gift, his message, and his journey with all of you today. Let's dive in and turn up the volume. Welcome to the Career Meets World podcast, Mark. It's such a pleasure to have you on. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you very much. It's we actually, I live down in San Diego area, and we haven't had any rain in about 7 months, and we had it all day yesterday and even this morning. And I'm sort of, it changes your state of mind. You kind of think, is this going to be just like 1 year for the rest of our lives, summer, So I'm feeling really good today. So thanks for asking.
Of course. I'm glad I caught you on a good day. We have so much that I want to dig into because I personally find tremendous value in what you teach, kind of your way of thinking, your methodology, and certainly your book, Lead from the Heart, that has had a tremendous impact on so many individuals. And as you might know, part of my practice is really teaching young, aspiring, emerging, first-time leaders how to lead with compassion. So for us, it's such a gift to have you on today. And I'm hoping that you can kind of share where this all started for you, right? What does Lead from the Heart mean? Where did it evolve? How did you evangelize this thought process?
I want to hit on what you just said first, and then I'm going to come back to your question and just say that the very cool thing is the people that you're trying to reach specifically, the young new leader that's emerging, that's wondering how they're going to get followers and how they're going to have influence and whether they're going to be successful. Universally, they're already on board with the way that we have to manage people is to care and support them and respect them and honor them as human beings. So you have a leg up, in much bigger leg up than I have had, because I'm trying to convince an audience of people that has, maybe 5, 10, 15 years of experience, and they've had a little success, and then you come in and you offer an alternative, and the alternative is so foreign to so many people. It's not just foreign, it's also repellent. It's like, no, we don't do that. That's not the way you manage people, because they're going to take advantage of you. And so what I found is it's almost inbred, and I think maybe because they've seen how their parents were managed and they were like, I don't want any experience like that. So I think you're going to have, let's just say the skids are greased for you, which makes me happy. We're not going to have to keep beating down the resistance the way that I have. So it's a long answer to your big question, which is why. Like, how did you come here, and why do you think this way? I'm going to try to give you the Reader's Digest version of this. And essentially, I really believe that this is just like why I'm here. For anybody who's open to that kind of thinking, I think this is my purpose. I mean, I think this was like my purpose. Like, you came into this planet to do this kind of work. And I never would have believed that, except that you look back on the sequence of events and you go, oh, wait a minute here. These are all adding up to something. And they're all adding up to a different mindset and a different point of view on how we should be managing people. And it started with my own upbringing. So my mom died when I was very, very young, and it came as a surprise. Nobody told me that she was dying. So I came home from school and they launched it on me. Your mom just died of cancer. And I knew that she'd been sick, but from an 8-year-old's point of view, you don't know that it's going to lead to death. And so it was obviously very traumatic. And from that point forward, I was raised by my father, and my father was actually a very successful guy. He was one of the top people in General Electric, very, fluent, all those, all the trappings of success. But he was a rather flawed human being, and he was intentional in trying to destroy my spirit, my self of well-being, and actively. And so through my childhood, he really wanted to cripple me and keep me from being successful in my life. And so what I grew up with was hearing that I had no value, I had no worth, that I would never amount to anything, and even worse, that I fundamentally lacked as a human being. And so actually you'd think, well, okay, so you get through all that. Well, what he did was, the final blow was right after I graduated from high school, he decided to kick me out of the house. And I thought, it's sort of a weird thing to say, my kid's not going to grow up to be anyone, but also at the same time to say, if you ever went to college, I'm going to pay for it. So at one point, somewhere in the conversation, he said, I'm going to pay for you to go to college if you go. And so I just assumed that that's what was going to happen. Instead, he pulled the rug out from under me and literally just came in the blue and said, this is it. Today's your last day. Go find some place to live. And there was no financial support. So there wasn't like, let's get in the car and go find you a nice, clean, safe place. Let's, I'm going to stock your refrigerator. I'm going to give you for some months last rent and all those kinds of things. Come home on Sunday, I'm still your dad, those kinds of things. It was over. I never went back for a holiday, never went back for a birthday. And so from that moment, and I had a job that I was working like 10 hours a week. So I had to kind of figure out, how am I going to get survival? But also I had in my mind this idea that if I didn't graduate from college, that he would have been right, that he would have predicted I would have been a failure. So I was like, how do I manage all of this? And truthfully, my first year of college, like, I had professors going, what happened to that guy? Where, I wasn't going to classes. I was just so overwhelmed with what was going on in my life. But ultimately, I figured it out. I got into a rhythm of school and work, study, and I just kept doing that until I finally did graduate. I graduated from UCSD, real close to where I'm living, and graduated with honors at the end. So I kind of left there thinking, okay, at least I've triumphed in a big way, I've overcome all of this. But I also, in my own graduation, and I was sort of listening to the speaker, but looking around. And I was in this state of mind of, I'm relieved that I was able to pull this off. But I looked at the people that were near me and friends of mine going off to graduate schools and seeing their future as this is just one step. So I'm like, whew. And they're like, this is just the beginning. And I had this sense of, man, how much more successful could I have been at this point in my life if I'd had somebody who cared about me, who was, encouraging me, paying attention to my successes and saying, hey, good job on that paper, or good job in this class, you got an A in it or a B, or whatever. Having somebody who just had my back and gave me safety. I always felt like if my car broke down, the game was going to be over, no graduation, nothing. I was always living that kind of a fear. So through that thought process of my graduation day, something happened that I can't really explain. When I started managing people, I unconsciously started to give people everything that I always wanted and believed if I had had it, I would have been infinitely more successful. And so long in my career that a woman who I had hired when she was 18 years old, 20 years later, said to me, you realize you manage people very differently, right? And I think so I'm in my early 40s, and I'm like, wait a minute. I had this sort of sense that she might be right, but I really hadn't really refined it. So I sat down with her and I just said, give me examples of what I do. And so what she was doing was giving me these binary examples of, you do this, here's what everybody else is doing. You do this is what everybody else is doing. And I started to realize, obviously, I finally had this epiphany that, oh my God, like my whole upbringing had influenced me to do this. But the reason I continued it, Edward, was because it was phenomenally successful. People were beating a path to work for me. They did extraordinary things. And by the way, you hear heart and you think, well, that's soft. But I was like the most demanding guy. I was very competitive. I had to be, or just to succeed myself, I had to be that striver, And so I thought, well, if we're going to be successful, like if we're going to work, we might as well be really good at it. So that was sort of the aspiration. And it didn't manage what team I had or what education people had or male, female, it didn't matter. Everywhere I went, and I kept getting these promotions. Like, why are they promoting me? Don't they know that I'm not that guy? But they just kept giving me bigger and bigger roles. And over and over and over, I just saw that people really scaled mountains for me. So after that woman pointed this out to me, bottom line was, all I tried to do was refine it. I wasn't thinking I was going to be writing a book or going on to doing this kind of work. I just thought, oh, this is like phenomenal. Now that I understand this, let me get this really, really good. So I spent the next 2 or 3 years refining it, kept getting promotions, kept getting bigger jobs. And then the organization that I was working for, I had just been named leader of the year. The business I was running had set all kinds of records. And then the bank failed and was sold off. I stayed with another organization for 6 months, and I was so repelled by how they were managing people. I thought, I can't stay here. And I thought, well, I'm going to go write a book. And all I wanted to do is just talk about the practices. And I'm going to stop here just because I've been doing all the talking. The beginning of the book was just intending to say, if you did the practices that I've learned through all my life, if you just do these things, they're going to have infinite success. You're going to have infinitely great success. What I didn't realize going in was that there was more to the story, which became uncovered during the process of writing it.
Appreciate you sharing all of that. It's so important to understand the why behind everyone's driver and their mission. And it's pretty obvious and clear now, as you mentioned in retrospect, to understand what was the fuel to everything that you're doing today. For me, and I don't know if I've ever shared this story on the podcast, obviously I haven't with you, but with that said, I was fortunate. I had a family that was very tight-knit. We came from a Soviet background, and as you can imagine, it was a very kind of rigid, structured methodology to teaching, to parenting, to my upbringing. My parents also had to assimilate here and had no idea how to propel me into college or what SATs were or which colleges to go to. So to some extent, I had a similar pathway where I was operating blind, short of having supportive parents who wanted me to succeed. There's a difference there. But with that said, once I launched into my career, kind of started to experience the same things as you just mentioned. And it means so much to me that you shared that, because for me, I personally went through this experience alone, right? I didn't have the support. And through that process, every single time I got 1 year older, I wanted to help people 1 year younger, 2 years younger. And I wanted to share and disseminate as much knowledge and information onto them so they didn't have to go through this kind of expedition in life and figure out how to get into college, how to get into the workplace. And what I really want to share there is that we all go through different moments, and in the moment itself, we don't actually understand what's happening, right? It's hard to be self-aware, and it's hard to understand what we truly value. So what I really want to ask you is, if we're thinking about people listening right now and they're kind of going through the motions, they're going through their own personal experience, irrelevant of their childhood, we can get into that in a second, but irrelevant of that, how do you laser in on what matters to you personally? How do you step out of the present moment, reflect, whether it's through journaling or whatever the activity might be? What would be your recommendation to somebody to really think about, these are the things I enjoy doing, these are the things I was gifted, or this might be my true mission?
Well, I mean, I honestly thought, I figured out very early on that I have a capability for being a leader. And I grew up having been taught that I had no value. So I had this sort of odd experience where I'm having success, but I'm not believing it. But I wanted it so much that I just kept trying to do the work on myself and fully understand who I was. And that included a lot of excavation of what I had gone through. You need to heal that. So for those people who have that experience, I will say that when I speak, that when I'm done and people come up to me afterwards, what many people whisper into my ear, they don't say it in front of other people, is I had an experience similar to yours. So there are a lot of, and obviously no one's going to have my direct experience, but what people have is something that was painful that they have to overcome. So I really do believe that to know thyself is the most essential thing that a leader can do. So the sooner you understand what your motivations were, right? So interestingly, one of the things that I've learned since the book came out, with help of other people, is that what drove me through my entire career was to prove over and over to my father that he was wrong. And I mean, he wasn't even in my life. Like I wasn't sending him updates on, hey, I just got a vote. I'm a VP now. I'm a first VP now. I'm an SVP. I never did any of that. It was all inside of me, right? And that's sort of a perverse way of driving yourself, motivating yourself, right? You should have aspirations for yourself, not to justify your existence to your father or prove to him that he was wrong. And so I wish I had known that sooner. So I think the answer that I would give to you and to your audience, and particularly because you're focused on, emerging leaders, is that you start to think about, what did I learn from my mom? What did I learn from my dad? What were the influences? And what's good about that? And what might be limiting in terms of that? But at the end of the day, understand what it is that drives you, what's motivating you, and what are you insecure about? What is it that you don't want people to know? And establish your values. So this takes time. This takes work. It takes sitting down with pen and paper and say, like, who do I want to be known for? What are the things, what are the qualities that I want people to see in me? And I think that's what it's all about for me. So somebody said to me years ago, like, for a message that you're conveying, like if you're gonna write a book called Lead from the Heart, you better embody that. You better, that has to live through everything you're doing, or it won't be authentic. And I think that's the direction that I would give to your people, which is say, understand who you are, what your motivations are, what your strengths are, what the limitations are, what you might want to improve upon. But ultimately, what do I want to be known for? Like when I'm in a stressful situation, when I'm in a very difficult time and I've got to make a decision, what do I want to be known for then? Because that's the moment where most people buckle and they go, I want to be, I want to be a really caring, supportive boss. And then you go into a meeting and you're not hitting your numbers and you go, well, we could lay off some people here. Like that's a really quick instinct. But is that aligned to who you are? And could you, if you had a value that said, I'm going to value and support people, could you then come up with an alternative? Maybe we ask everybody to take a pay cut for 6 months or something so that we can keep people. It's a whole different mindset when you live to your values as opposed to wobble through those values. I think that's the most essential thing that a new leader could do. And they will excel and they will blow other people away because most people don't do this work.
Hey there, listeners. I just wanted to pop in and let you know that as a part of Career Meets World, I am now taking on exclusive one-on-one clients who are hungry leaders or entrepreneurs and want to learn how to succeed under immense pressure. I believe that being an effective business leader is equal parts understanding your subconscious and developing and executing a personalized growth plan. These two aspects continually build upon each other, and my coaching practice is designed to amplify your confidence levels and provide you a toolkit to thrive in any situation. Career Meets World is the ultimate achievement partner, and we support our clients with an always-on approach. So if you're ready to unleash your wildest leadership potential and take control of your success, find Career Meets World or me personally, Edward Gorbis, on LinkedIn and shoot me a short message about your goals with the title, Let's Start. And now it's time to get back to today's episode. Absolutely. So if you're listening right now, I'd recommend to pause, rewind, write down all of those questions that Mark just mentioned and go through the exercise yourself, because it's so powerful to define your values. And I'm curious if you agree with this, but more so if you want to expand on it, is that when we write down our values in the moments of distress or high emotion, we can remove that emotion, parse it out, and operate from the place of values and composure. I've often seen leaders step in those challenging moments when they're not hitting numbers or they're not meeting expectations. Their emotion kicks in, their amygdala kicks in, and they're operating from a place of their biology that they just want to essentially survive. And that's not necessarily what they want to convey to the world or how they want to show up and serve their people. So that exercise of value writing and being value driven is instrumental to being a successful leader. Does that align with how you've seen things play out with maybe slightly older or more mature leaders?
Absolutely. I mean, so, it's interesting because I'm learning. I have my own podcast and I'm learning, and I've seen recent research that just basically shows that, the number of CEOs that are being fired, CEOs that are being fired, like in the last 5 years relative to the previous 5 years, it's up like 36%. And it's insider trading and fraud and, inappropriate relationships. It's all over the board. And you'd say, well, how did you ever get to be the CEO and then fail? And I think it's really because we human beings have a dark side. All of us have a dark side. And one of the things that I've learned also on top of that is that when we get power, we abuse it exclusively. We will all abuse power. And if you haven't defined your values, if you haven't really thought through who you want to be, when those stressful situations come up, power and ego, and what you're talking about the amygdala going into place, now all of a sudden you've got fear driving you and you're like, I got to survive here, so it's me against the world. And the minute you've established to people that it's about you as opposed to it's about them, you're done. You've lost your credibility, you've lost your trust. And in this case of these CEOs, they've actually lost their jobs because they had never done the work. They got all the way to the top of their organizations, but now at a very high level, the stresses are even greater, and they don't have the backbone to do this. So this is essential work. And we just get into work and we just get into leadership and we think, oh, we're just going to figure it out. And I guess really the point I'm trying to make is your moment is going to come. And if you haven't done the work before it comes, you're going to probably blow it, because it's so tempting to make a decision that will support you, serve you well in the moment, that doesn't have a long view of what's the long-term implications of this decisions on my team, on how I'm perceived as a leader. I'll tell you a story. This was my test. So I started to put this book together, and all of a sudden I realized I had a friend say to me, this is like sitting exactly where I am. We're having this conversation. He's just checking in with me. How are things going with the book? And I told him, I'm just about to write it. I've done all my piles. I've got it all organized. I'm ready to go. And he goes, well, you are going to explain why this works, right? And I said, what do you mean? And he goes, well, if you don't explain to people why it's going to work, they're going to just assume that you have to have a shitty childhood in order to lead this way. And it was like, Edward, it was like, I never had given it a moment of thought. I just thought people would take me at my word, right? So I was like, my God, I've done none of that work. Haven't even thought about doing any of that work. So then it was left on me to figure out, well, what is it why did people respond this way? So I started thinking about it, and it hit me one day that I was affecting the hearts in people. That's what I believed that I was doing. Like something so profound and was going on inside of people that made them want to do this great work for me. And so I went in at the end of the day, I told my wife, I go, I have wasted a year of my life because this book, all what it amounts to is leading with heart. And the world that I've come from, this dog eat dog financial services environment, they're going to like, yeah, right. Like who leads from the heart? Like complete mess, right? And I was so depressed. So I ended up getting research that validated the whole thing that I won't talk about right now, but just mind blowing, coming from manna from the heaven, just validation for this whole theory that shows that the heart and the mind are working together, and the heart actually is a feeling sensing organ that's influencing our behavior. Major, major stuff. So I give the book my title, Lead from the Heart. And I have no network. Nobody knows who I am. I have no platform, no Twitter following, nothing. Coming out of, executive role where nobody knows who I am. Now I've written a book which basically says, kick me, right? I mean, stupid leadership, whatever you want to look at it, you don't lead from the heart. So I hired this woman, paid her $10,000. And I said, read the book, read my articles, and help me strategize on building a platform. Like, how do I build a brand and how do I get people to know me? So she does all that work. She cashes the check, which is important because in the follow-up conversation, she said, okay, I've done all the work that I'm supposed to do, and I have two recommendations, A and B. You're going to hate A. A is what I want you to follow, but you're probably going to want to do B. Which do you want first? And I go, just give me A. She goes, you're going to fucking fail if you continue to use the words lead from the heart. And you know what? I knew she was right. I mean, I knew instinctively what she was trying to tell me was, this goes back to the very beginning of our conversation, that most of the world wasn't ready to hear that language, that we have been so convinced that you bring the heart in, that it's going to backfire, you're going to be seen as weak, people are going to take advantage of you. And what she was trying to tell me was, she literally said, just say killer engagement. And if you want to insert the heart thing in, later on in your speech, is like, it was totally inauthentic. But she was trying to save me what was proved to be true, which was that I was going to be met with tremendous resistance, like so much resistance that, like, do I go do something else? I could be a lot happier going back to work, but I had to make the decision. Is this what I believe in? Is this my truth? Do I know that this is true? So for the next 5 years, my speaking agent told me that I had more interest and more rejection than any person he's ever represented. He goes, you were number 2, like probably 100 times with companies. And at the last minute, they go, we're going to go with the other guy because we're afraid he's going to come in and sing Kumbaya, or, not kidding. And it was really depressing to hear that. But that's who I am. And if I can own that, inevitably, I believe that the world would meet me where I am. And that meant you're going to have to take some punches. And I think that's the thing, is that when you have values and you make decisions aligned to those values, sometimes people are going to question them. And if you haven't done the work to say, nope, this is who I am and this is what I'm going to be, then you could go, oh, well, I guess I could change my decision, or I could make a different decision. You're right. And then people wobble, and then you look inconsistent, and then your credibility is shot.
What I love about that story is that it's a really good lesson in, if you have any idea and it feels like it's going to get met with resistance because it deviates from everyone else's standardized, normalized thinking, or you feel like you're a salmon swimming upstream, like Mark. And there are other people, but you're a really, really good example of what it means to believe in your own values and stay true to it and emanate it out into the world, right? You've done that consistently throughout your career, but I'm sure there's a little bit of fear, anxiety that kicks in, and it's natural when you're launching a new book, especially when you might not have that brand recognition. But I love the fact that you stay true to who you were. That's so important to remember as a leader, right? Is that it does not matter what all the other noise outside of us is telling us to do or how to behave or how to act. We need to stay true to who we are, because that's the only way we truly show up every day consistently. I think we've both seen leaders that try to embody somebody without having done the work. It does not mean you can't become a leader that leads from the heart, but if you haven't done the work and the mindset work that you were mentioning just a moment ago, it's going to be hard to consistently show up that way. So what I'd be curious to know, because as you mentioned, fortunately, there are a lot of people who haven't necessarily gone through a difficult upbringing. There's
Right,
plenty
right.
of people who have. What would be your recommendation to people who are thinking about leadership, just stepped into leadership, into what do they need to invest in to make sure that they consistently show up and lead their people with compassion and from the heart, and that they're genuine? What was some of the work that you did in that moment, right? It's not necessarily just figuring it out and pencil and paper. That's a lot of it. But what else needs to happen to become that better version of the leader that you want to be?
Well, I think it's important that we sort of come fast forward to today and speak about this current environment, because what's happening now due to COVID is, so this is an interesting question you just asked me, because where we left it a minute ago was that, this woman says, do not under any circumstances continue to use that expression because it's going to backfire and it's not going to be successful. And if you do, it's going to be a lot of punches and you're going to have to endure some really dark years. And all of that was kind of true. And I thought, well, in the moment, it's like, well, do I stop doing this? Do I do the killer engagement thing? Or do I own this and take the punches? And so, of course, I made that decision. And there were many times where when I thought about the decision, it was like, this is painful to go through this. So I think this is one thing I want to isolate, which is that when you have your values and you make a decision, there are going to be some times where you're going to feel it inside of you. You're going to feel threatened. Like, did I make the right decision? Because it may not be what other people want. And you're going to have to be willing to experience that pain. It's like making a decision at the beginning of a tunnel and then driving through the tunnel with no lights and being in that tunnel, trying to figure out how do I get to the other side of it, and getting to the other side of it and go, I just did that. Like, I made it. But the pain is the tunnel. And every time leaders get into the tunnel, they start to get uncomfortable. And I think this is an important thing, is to say, leadership is not easy. People are always going to question you. You're always going to have somebody upset with you, and you've got to get comfortable with that. But to the question that you just asked me, I always believed that there would be this moment in time, and I believed it would be a tipping point. I didn't think that it was going to be like evolutionary. I thought there would be this moment in time. Never did I imagine we would have a global pandemic. But that is that is the tipping point. And what happened is we sent, 60% of the working population home and said, start working from home. And then we closed the schools and we brought kids home. And now we've got husband and wives, or, basically all family possibilities, working together, often in small spaces. The average home in America is like 1,400 square feet. So imagine having 2 or 3, 4 people all working, trying to go to school, trying to get their work done, try to have some peace and quiet. Very, very stressful. And then you have a boss going, hey, where are you on this? And where are you on this? And what it did was, it sort of forced organizations and leaders, inherently one and the same, to say, we just can't be demanding. We just can't say, keep your personal life separate anymore. Leave your troubles at the door is the expression we used to. When you're at work, you're at work. You go home, you deal with what your kids' problems or your, whatever issues are going on with you, elderly parents. I don't really need to know about it. That's been the ethic. But now what we're saying is, if I don't really understand your story, if I don't understand the constraints that you have personally and what you're faced with, and help support you personally that way, you're not going to want to work for me anymore, because that's how deeply personal all this has become for people. So some leaders have figured this out, some organizations have figured this out, and I think inevitably what's going to happen is we're going to shake out the managers who didn't figure this out, who didn't want to, who just said, you know what, I don't really care, Edward, what's going on with you and your wife and the challenges that you're faced with. I don't, that's not my issue. My issue is you have these deliverables, hit them, hit the deadlines, and we won't have any issues. And that's kind of how we've, historically managed, and it just doesn't work anymore. So it sort of ushers in a requisite for anybody who's a manager to get to know their people personally, which, by the way, is essential part of leading from the heart, to get to know them. What's going on with you? How can I support you? What minor accommodations can I make? If I know you have a kid that goes to school at 8 o'clock in the morning and you're helping that person, your son or daughter, get online and get squared away with school, am I going to schedule an 8 o'clock conference call at the time that's going to put you in that kind of conflict every day? So maybe I do it at 7, or maybe I do it at 9. Find some way to make some accommodations. The thing is that we've always sort of thought that I don't have to make those accommodations. I'm the boss. You meet me when I say. And this is sort of this balancing act where we're saying, no, let's be a little bit more thoughtful. And here's the thing. We're hardwired as human beings to reciprocate. Whatever we get, we reciprocate. So I come over to you. Let's say I live around the block from you, and I knock on the door and I go, hey, Edward, my wife made brownies and she made way too many. And I would like to present you with a dozen brownies. Hope you enjoy them. So I'm going to ask you in real life, like if I were to do that to you, and the answer is, I'm going to hint, is not, oh, thank you, we love brownies. That's not the natural instinctive reaction. So if I said to you, hey, knock on your door, here are the brownies, these are for you, what do you think your instinctive response would? You wouldn't necessarily say this out loud, but what would you feel inside?
I think there's an element of gratefulness, but there's also of some people react differently, right? I've learned to be a welcoming person, but I also know a lot of people say, I'm good, thank you, I don't need it. And they kind of build a wall in between both of you. And they're not necessarily welcoming.
So I think there's both, right? I think you wouldn't, most people wouldn't go, no, I'm not going to take your brownies. They're going to take the brownies, but they're going to take them with oh no, now I got to do something for him. And this goes back to our evolution, as caveman days. If I had a piece of meat and you didn't, I would give you a piece of meat to keep you alive. This is how we survived as a species. But the minute you got meat, it was sort of expected that you would repay me back. And so we have this in our DNA. And so if you care and support about people, if you say, hey, Edward, what's going on with you? What's a good time for a meeting? When can we meet that would, that meets with all the challenges that you face? You're going to go, wow, that's so thoughtful. So I really want to do something for him. And if you don't manipulate that piece of information, if you use it with sincerity and authenticity, you can expect that anytime you really support people, if you make it about them, they're going to do great work for you because they want to. They want to give back to you. And this is what I found when I kind of tried to figure out, why is it that people just kept doing great work for me? The reason was just because they never worked for anybody like me. They'd never worked for anyone in their career who cared about them so much as a human being and wanted to see the best for them, that it was like, I'm being loved and I'm going to give love back. That's really what it boiled down to. So there's a long way of getting to the answer to your question, but that's really what it's about.
So leading with sincerity, and again, coming from a good place, is arguably the most important thing when it comes to leadership, is understanding what the other individual is going through, recognizing that and accommodating it so that you can win together. At the end of the day, the whole purpose of any team, doesn't matter the size of the organization, is to be successful as a unit. So if you understand, let's call how to play the business game from a place of compassion, you're going to win together. And that's the beauty of this whole process. What I've also learned, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, is that it's pretty easy as human beings, and it might sound woo-woo to a lot of people, but I think it's an important conversation around the energy that we show up with and kind of what our presence is, the place our body is coming from. What's your perspective on that in terms of, can people tell when you're being inauthentic?
Instantaneously. I believe, just to use the vernacular, we have a built-in bullshit detector. So you can't fake any of this. You can't fake leading from the heart. In fact, it's the worst thing you could possibly do. Because if you really don't care about people, if you really don't care about their growth, their success, their well-being, what's going on in their lives, the whole person, people feel that because it starts with intention. So if your intention is, I'm going to show these people a little bit of love so that they think that I have their back, people pick up on that intention. So I don't really know how to explain this except to say that the heart it plays a role in this. And I don't know, this science is emerging that, that it's not fully, understood. But there's something about human beings where we can sense almost instantaneously whether somebody intends to support us or whether they intend to manipulate us or take advantage of us. So you have to be all in. And it's interesting because Gallup research has shown, I use the expression a caring gene. So what I'm really advocating for is that you love people, you want to see them do well, you're not threatened by them. You have a mentality of a coach as opposed to a manager. A manager wants to tell people and feels that they get to control and tell people what to do. A coach is, here, I'm going to help you become better. That's a very different mindset. So I would say that really start there. But ultimately, you have people looking at you and whether or not you make them feel like they matter to you. And so that's binary, right? Every day you're asking about energy, you're asking about emotions and how you make people feel. That's really all that matters to people, how you make them feel. And emotions are contagious. So if you come in every day and you're pissed off or upset about something, or you're constantly focusing on what the team isn't doing as opposed to all the things that they're doing well, you're creating an emotion. And those emotions are very much contagious throughout your team. So you have a meeting with your managers and your managers hear you upset and angry. Well, they're going to take that back to their team. And now all of a sudden you've polluted the entire organization. So I would be very mindful about the kind of emotions and energy that you project and that you bring, because if you're bringing positivity, if you're bringing hope, if you're bringing optimism, realistic optimism, right? But nevertheless, if you're bringing that kind of positivity and encouragement to people, which encouragement literally means to give people heart, that extends and people are fueled by that. And when they're fueled by that, it influences their interactions, people. So their customers are feeling it, their coworkers are feeling it. It's a really powerful thing. So you decide which kind of energy you want to bring to this. Either way, this is what's going to be representative of your energy. And by the way, it was interesting because in my career, at one point, I used to manage a lot of bank branches. So I would go visit them, right? And I would walk in 30 seconds. It's like, you knew whether or not it was good or bad. That's how fast you could tell. And I became attuned to it. But I think most of us are. You can just sense in a manager. You do a couple meetings with somebody, you have a pretty good indication of whether or not they're in it for you or in it for themselves.
Absolutely. I think we could all sense the vibration in the room and whether or not people are extremely happy to be at work or in their environment, or you look at even body posture, right? You can tell how people show up just through their physiology, short of actually what they're saying. So there's so much power and value into that. And I'm sure we could have another hour-long conversation on that. But one of the final questions I do want to ask you before we jump into the hot seat is the hot seat. It's coming. So you spend so much time teaching and coaching and mentoring. What are you still doing to this day to help yourself grow?
I read constantly. I basically have given myself every weekend for probably the last 5 or 6 years, where I just make sure that before I end the weekend that I've read a book. And I'm reading in a lot of different disciplines. So you would think, well, if you want to be a better leader, you should read leadership books. And what I found is that that's true, but that's really not going to expand you. So if you are reading outside of those disciplines, if you're reading in a lot of different disciplines and you're just getting insights, you're going to find what I have found is that authors in genres that have nothing to do with leadership are giving you insights into leadership without ever asking them to. And you're able to then compare that to the things that you're hearing from the so-called experts and so forth. And so I think really it's investing in yourself and in your own growth and making the time to do it. People say, well, I don't have time. I got kids, I got, a job or whatever. Everybody can, if you read one book a month, that's 12 great new ideas that you're taking, or at least, I always believe if I can just take one great idea from every book I'm reading, that's worthwhile. So if you could take 12 ideas that you didn't have at the beginning of the year, if you just read 12 books and picked books outside of them, I think you'll find, and I've seen this done because one of the things I've done as a manager is to ask people who work for me to read books, and then I'll quiz them and test them and see what they've learned, and we discuss them, and you can see they stand up stronger. They're changed by it because it's thinking that they didn't ordinarily have. And no one is going to ask you to do this. No one's going to do it to you. You have to do it to yourself. It's all on you. We have to own our own growth.
I love that. It's a personal homework assignment and it's a personal growth journey that I appreciate that you're still going through. And it's so important to highlight that because, again, I think a lot of people will perceive you as this extremely successful leader when you were in the corporate workplace and now in your own practice, but you're continuously hungry and you're kind of captivating this new energy and information that's out there in the world and learning from different angles. To add to what you were saying is that I'm a huge history buff and I love to learn from the past because there's so many patterns that happen throughout history as it relates to leadership, cultures, groups of people, and you can start to piece that all together and see what's happening in our day-to-day and how people operate, and it helps you become a more holistic leader. And that's the ultimate goal here, is become a holistic leader that understands people as a whole, shows up for their individuals, and really leads with compassion. So Mark, I appreciate all of that information, wisdom. It's super powerful. And before we let you off the hook, as I mentioned, we put all of our friends and guests through the hot seat just to spice things up and make things fun. So are you ready?
I don't know what I'm ready for. I'm going to say yes.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us. So look, we're going to make these fun. And in the spirit of continuously learning from you, I'll ask you 3 questions. So if you were to take your team out to dinner, doesn't matter, former team, today's team, but if you're going to take them out to dinner anywhere in the world, you could travel, it doesn't matter, forget budget, where would you take them and why?
I'd probably take them to the Sea Grill, which is a restaurant at Rockefeller Center in New York City. And I would take them in the winter, the ice skating rink, the Christmas tree at Rockefeller Center. You're looking all at it. You're watching New York City alive. And it's where I grew up. I grew up in New York, and that's a spot that makes me really, really happy. So to bring people who work for me to a place where I'm already completely alive, I think that just gives people that energy. And I'm sort of assuming that I would be bringing people together, not just for dinner. Like whenever I brought my team together for those kinds of events, it was always to thank them. And so to take them to a beautiful place that's inspiring with the lights and the snow and the ice and people skating and beautiful food, I think people leave going, he really cares about me. And that's really the essence of why I would do that in the first place.
Awesome. I love it. Next one up for you is, what are 2 or 3 of your favorite books that you've read this year?
2 or 3 favorite books that I've read this year. Um, Eric Larson's book on Winston Churchill. You were just talking about history. And one of the most interesting books, Eric Larson is just this phenomenal writer. The book is still, I read this book probably 7 months ago. He was on my podcast. His book is still in the top 5 New York Times bestseller list right now. And it's about Winston Churchill during the Blitz and his leadership. And it's extraordinary. But we also know that Winston Churchill was a hugely flawed guy. He was a racist, for one thing, treated the Indian people, it was a colony, treated them very badly. But in that moment, his leadership examples are so absolutely phenomenal that I just think it was just mind blowing what presence this guy had and what vision he had and what self-security he had to go up against much threat to the whole, country, whole UK and England specifically. It was just remarkable leadership. I think, flaws aside, the greatest leader, in the 20th century by far. So that would be one. I have a lot of my books here right now. So I'll tell you another one that I really loved was this book called Leading with Character by that's just coming out. In fact, I have it right here. Jim Loehr is the author, and it's one of the books that I've just recently read. He's coming. He's already been on my podcast, but it hasn't been produced yet. But this is somebody who is the coach to the Blue Angels and to some of the greatest sports stars in every sport: hockey, tennis, golf, you name it. And I think what he's learned goes back to something that we were talking about earlier, which has to do with the fact that inevitably, and this is what I have found in my career, you're going to be faced with a challenge. And if you haven't done that pre-work on yourself, you're going to fail it. You're going to slip and fall. And so to read that after my whole life experience, to have that kind of validation, those are two very, very big books. But I'll show you, these are just the books that I can, keep on my bookshelf that I've read, probably in the last, 5-6 months. So I love books because, and I love talking to people about books because their insights aren't necessarily the same as mine. So you can kind of feed off of each other and really reinforce it. And I'm going to show you one last thing that's pretty neurotic, but every book of nonfiction, and this is just one of them, but I literally type up notes to every single book that I read. And when I fly, and so this is just, literally every book of nonfiction, not fiction, but nonfiction. And I've got 3 of these binders. And what I do is I type them up because I believe that the reinforcement of writing notes in the book, typing up those notes, and then having them, you reinforce your knowledge and your memory of the book. So you're leaving the book with a greater understanding. But then I take probably 10 of them with me every time I fly, and I read them on the plane, and I'm reinforcing it. So I'm just continually marinating in the very information that I'm trying to teach. So it seems like a crazy amount of time, but I found that, that it's a real huge payoff for me.
That's awesome. You're a student for life and you're reinforcing in really powerful ways. So Winston Churchill and Leading with Character, is that right?
Yes. Yeah. In fact, I'm sorry that I'm blowing this, that I cannot think of his name, and I gave the book away. So it's The Splendid and the Vile. That's the name of it.
Awesome.
Great book.
One last question for you, since you just alluded to New York, and I love asking this question. Outside of the phrase leading from the heart, if you were to show up to Times Square and we can let you write any message you want across all of Times Square outside of leading from the heart, what would you write?
Love your people. No question. Love your people. It's really, at the end of the day, positive emotions are an experience of love. When we see something beautiful and we feel awe, that's an experience of love. When someone does something kind to us or supportive or thoughtful to us, appreciation, give us our time, that's all an experience of love. So it doesn't mean you have to go up to people and go, I love you, Edward. I love you, Edward. It's not like that. It's just demonstrated to people, because when people feel love, that creates the most optimal level for their performance. When people feel safe and supported and valued and appreciated and they're growing, these elements all translate to love. So when a leader creates that environment, they're going to get what I got, which is people who want to work for you, who want to support you, who care about you, who'll tell you when you're making mistakes and keep you from making a bigger one. That's a huge one. Knowing you've got people that will come to you and say, hey, Mark, what you just did there and what you just said, you offended a lot of people. Do you realize that? And you can, in that time, go, no, I didn't. And now I want to step back and say, it's been brought to my attention and that wasn't what my goal was. And I'm so sorry. And then it's over. Otherwise it festers. So, but it's obvious. It's funny because you just gave me this, like, I was inspired by it. Like I've been in Times Square so many times, the huge signs. Imagine love your people. How powerful that would be up there. That would be great.
We probably need that now more than ever. So I appreciate that message. I love our conversation. You obviously, and we've alluded to this, have an incredibly powerful book that I recommend anyone picks up right now. And I just want to make sure that our audience and folks can connect with you, because you continuously dish out so much wisdom. I know you're on Twitter, but what's the best way for folks to continuously engage with your work?
All roads, if you just leadfromtheheart.com or markccrowley.com, each way you want to go, it brings you to my website. But I'm on Twitter at Mark C. Crowley. You can connect with me at LinkedIn. If I can help you in any way, please do. But my podcast is on the website, my articles are on the website, and the book is on the website. So that's probably the best way to find me. Thank you for asking that.
Of course. Make sure to connect with Mark. I've been following your work for quite a while now, and I'm glad we connected. I genuinely and deeply appreciate the time, and I know that so many people will benefit from the message, and it's an extrapolation of what I'm teaching. And the only way for us to be successful and for us to continuously build a stronger, more compassionate leadership culture is to welcome new ideas. And yours are always welcome here. So I'd love to have you back one day. And Mark, thank you so much.
Thank you, Edward. It's been a joy. I really appreciated the opportunity. A great way for me to start my week. So thank you very much.
Of course. And as we always say at Career Meets World, go unleash your wildest potential. Thanks so much, Mark. Hey, thanks so much for listening to the Career Meets World podcast. I would love to get to meet you. There are a couple of ways we can connect. You know I love my LinkedIn. Simply search for Career Meets World or Edward Gorbis and feel free to connect. Second is via Instagram at Career Meets World. And third is through our website. I have a special spot for you full of fun, free resources. All you have to do is go to careermeetsworld.com, subscribe to our newsletter, and we'll provide you the free resources to help you boost your career and reach financial freedom. And if this podcast was helpful to you in any way, please consider rating and reviewing this podcast on Apple Podcasts. This helps us help more people. Simply tap the rate with 5 stars and leave a sentence with what you liked about the podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. Remember, strengthening your growth mindset is your ticket to success. I'm Edward Gorbis, and we'll catch you on next week's episode.